mention it, that the technical committees are created by the technical board. Once a proposal for the creation of a technical committee is submitted to the technical board not only decides on the approval of the technical committee, but also decides on the allocation of the secretariat for the technical committee. Then, once this is done and there is a decision on who is going to be the member holding the secretariat of that TC, it's up to the member to decide who is going to be the TC secretary. So there is no need to take a decision at TC level on who is going to be the secretary of the TC. But as I said earlier, you need that for the chair of the TC. The TC secretary needs to ensure that the meetings run smoothly and efficiently, and that the deadlines are kept of delivering the standards on time for inquiry and formal vote. The TC secretary is in charge of the preparation of the invitation for meetings, the preparation of agendas, the documents for discussion, the reports after the meetings, the list of decisions. So all this needs to be prepared by the TC secretary. That needs to be submitted well in advance and according to the deadlines. So for the plenary meeting, for instance, the submission of the agenda needs to be done 2 months before the meeting takes place. The background documents needs to be submitted 4 weeks before the meetings takes place. So all these need to be respected. The TC secretary, of course, needs to manage, in the case of CEN, the electronic platform is the CEN documents, where the documents are placed there for all the technical committee members. The TC secretary needs to know quite well the standardization rules and procedures, including the CEN BT decisions on the rules, and is, of course, the main contact point with CCMC. So if we want to contact the technical committee to discuss any matter, we would address the question or the comment to the TC secretary. Normally, I would always put in copy as well the TC chair, but in theory, CCMC should not contact directly an expert to discuss something. The TC secretary is really our main contact point. The secretary needs also to work closely with other TCs in case there is a need for coordination, or for instance, if 2 TCs have a disagreement, the TC secretary also has, together with the chair, an important role. And in case of standardization requests, each standardization request that is accepted by the technical board, it includes their, let's say, requirement that we need to deliver every year annual reports. And these normally should be the task of the TC secretary to prepare the annual reports, of course, with the support of the relevant experts, eventually the conveners. And CCMC can also help you in drafting the annual reports that needs to be fulfilled in line with the accepted standardization requests. This is in a very graphical way the composition of a CEN technical committee. So as I said, you have the chair, you have the secretary, then you have the CEN members, and each member can, let's say, nominate 3 delegates to participate to be part of the CEN technical committee. But of course, 1 person would be the head of delegation. So meaning that every time there is a meeting and there is a need for a vote, obviously only the head of delegations can vote. So we cannot have 2 or 3 votes per member. This is quite logical. We have the European partners that I just explained earlier, that they are observers. They can participate and contribute to the drafting of standards, including the Annex 3 organizations that you heard or you will hear later on this training, like the organizations representing the interests of consumers, SMEs, environment, and trade unions. They can also, and they're more than welcome to participate in the technical work. The European partners, there is an important CEN-CENELEC Guide 25 on the partnership. In terms of international work, if the CEN Technical Committee works together with ISO in some deliverables, the ISO TC representative can also attend the CEN Technical Committee meeting. Affiliate standardization bodies can also attend. Liaison officers from other TCs. So if the work of 2 TCs are very close to each other, they can nominate someone to attend each other TCs. I can, for instance, remember that we have a TC on cement they have there is a TC on concrete. The work is so related that they have appointed experts to participate in the work of the other TCs. And of course, the European Commission can also attend. From my experience, I don't remember ever the Commission very proactively attending at each plenary meeting. However, we could invite the European Commission to attend a specific meeting to explain some issues related to harmonized standards or a standardization request, or if you are interested, for instance, in some EU policy development that can impact your work. In this case, we could invite the European Commission. What is also important is that CCMC is the bridge, makes the bridge between the CEN TC and the European Commission. It would be more preferable if you contact CCMC in case you want to discuss something with the European Commission. Now let's move to the working groups. Working groups are created by the technical committees. They also need titles and scopes. The working groups, as I said earlier, they have the main task to really draft the CEN deliverables like standards or technical specifications or technical reports. The working groups are there and they normally have a short-term task, meaning that if the working group at a certain point is not needed anymore, if discussions are not taking place in the working groups, if no documents are being circulated at all, then the technical committee should, in theory, disband the working group, having in mind that at any time there is the possibility to then relaunch the working group. But this is something that we leave completely up to the technical committee to manage this situation of the working group activity. The working groups contain individual experts that are there in their personal capacity. And there is a big difference between the members of a TC and the working group experts. The members of the TCs, they are there and they need to represent the national position. The working group experts, they are there because they are the best of the best of the best in their field. But of course, they need to know very well the national position, because otherwise there is the risk, if they go against the national position, there is always the risk that the standards will not go through at inquiry or formal vote. The working group convener, again, very important person. It is appointed by the TC via a TC decision. When a working group is looking for or needs a convener, normally the TC should launch a call for conveners, and the members should submit, can nominate, let's say, proposals for conveners. Always need to attach the CV of the convener. This is very important. And in addition to that, the members should also provide secretariat support to the working group. We call that the professional standardization support. So each working group should also have a professional standardization support. The working group convener is responsible for drafting the standards together with the experts and sending the documents once he or she feels that there is consensus reached in the working group. The convener needs to submit the documents to the TC secretary. In case of issues at working group level, the working group convener needs to inform the TC leadership, and the working group convener also has the responsibility to report regularly to the TC. From my experience, this happens more at the TC plenary meetings, where there is the reporting of the different working groups, and each working group convener reports on the activities of the working group. But of course, if a convener would like to circulate more than one report by correspondence, for instance, it's more than fine. In terms of appointment, is similar to the chair of a TC. Normally, the first time a convener is appointed can be appointed for a max period of 6 years, and then it's possible additional, let's say, nominations of or appointments of the same convener, but each appointment is for 3 years max, of course, afterwards. There are two important BD decisions that we would like to remind you of. The first one is the Code of Conduct for experts participating in CEN and CENELEC technical work. So here is really a reminder for the technical committee members and working group experts that they need to participate in the TC with a clear scope and objective. They need to participate there to ensure that they go there to move the work forward. They need to participate actively. They need to behave ethically, because sometimes there could be a little conflicts in the TC. So it's quite important to remind the TC members on that. The second decision is about the best practices for improving effectiveness of working group meetings. This document is a very useful tool, particularly to working group conveners. It's basically a reminder that there are a number of things that the convener needs to do, like sending the invitations on time, sending the documents on time, ensuring at the meetings that there are clear actions and everyone knows what they have to do, and prepare the report of the meetings. So two important guidance that that you need to be aware, and you can as well share it in the TC if needed. So now we can move to the second part of this presentation. So from about how standards are being developed from the moment that the new work item is created until the publication of a standard. There are 4 types of CEN deliverables. The first one is European standards. Second one, we have technical specifications. We also have technical reports, and we have CEN workshop agreements. And the focus of this presentation is really on European standards, which basically is our prime deliverable. So how are standards developed? Here on this slide, you have the different steps. So obviously, first, there should be a proposal that needs to be assessed and then decided. Then we are in the stage, if it's positively assessed, of drafting the standards, and it's the moment that the consensus is being built within the working group. Then we enter into a stage of a public inquiry. After the inquiry closes, we enter normally into a stage that we call it consideration of comments. So the comments received at inquiry need to be discussed. And then the document is submitted to a formal vote. And if the vote is positive, it means that we enter into the finalization stage, and then towards the publication of the standard. So the proposals can really come from anywhere. I would say that the most typical origin of a proposal for a standard would be from a technical committee, an existing one. It could come as well from the European Commission. So as I said, the Commission may request a technical committee via a standardization request to develop harmonized standards. It could come from a CEN member, the national standardization bodies, and it could come as well from a CEN partner organization. So that's why European organizations can really contribute to the development of standards by making a proposal directly to a technical committee if they are interested. So the proposal must be basically evaluated. So there should be an assessment whether it's really needed, whether it's possible to develop, whether there are enough resources. So both if there are enough experts, if there is the need for financial resources. It's important to look at national level in terms of national legislation in order to assess whether something at national level could impact or conflict potentially some clauses of the standard. And that's why there should be the need, should be the possibility for the members to assess the need of having an A deviation. And of course, it is important to ensure that that project falls in the scope of the TC. It could be useful as well to look at the scope of other TCs, and in particular, the work program of other TCs, just to ensure that everything is okay and the proposal is correctly allocated to the right TC. And then there should be a decision on whether start working on the draft standard or not. Normally, this is via the approval of a new work item. Another possibility would be to do it through the preliminary work item. The preliminary work item has a lifespan of 3 years. It could be quite useful to go first with the preliminary work item in case, let's say, the work is still premature and the TC do not want to be bothered with deadlines to submit the documents to inquiry and formal vote, and there is a lot of time needed still to have a decent draft to start the work. This could be useful to have a preliminary work item. Please remember that the preliminary work item within the 3 years can be activated at any time at the choice of the TC. But I would say that the most common would be to go with a new work item. In other words, the new work item is the identification number of the project, okay? So the creation of a new work item always always needs to be done by correspondence through the committee internal balloting. We call it the CIB, and it has a duration of 2 months. So this means that it is not possible to be, for example, in a TC plenary meeting and decide to create a work item. This is not possible. These always have to be done by correspondence. And if you think about it, it's quite logical, because in the plenary meeting, you might have some national delegations missing. So if you do it via CIB, you know that you will reach all the NSBs. Now, there are two important criteria for the creation or for the approval of the new work item. The first one is that you need to have at least 5 countries willing to participate actively. So that's the first criteria. What does it happen if you don't have the 5 members? In theory, the work item cannot be created, even if you got a positive vote, in theory. Now, there are some alternatives. If the TC secretary really cannot find, let's say, the 5th country, a possibility would be the TC would make a request to the technical board for a derogation of the 5 members rule. Of course, the TC needs to provide a justification, but this possibility is there. The second criterion would be, of course, you need a positive vote. It could be a weighted vote, or it could be a simple majority vote. A weighted vote would apply if it's for developing a new standard or a new technical specification, or for revisions or amendments of standards to which you are planning to change the scope of the standard. So in this case, you always need to go with weighted vote. However, simple majority positive votes applies when you are dealing with the amendment or revision of a standard to which you will not change the scope at all of the document. So in this case, simple majority applies. There is one important element about preliminary work items that needs to be said. I would advise you always to go with a CIB, 2-month CIB to approve the preliminary work item. However, you can as well create a preliminary work item in a meeting, as long as you indicate on the agenda of the meeting that there is the need to have a decision to approve the preliminary work item. The agenda needs to be, let's say, circulated 2 months before the meeting. And of course, a new work item form with the details of the project needs to be as well circulated 2 months before. So there is all the information. So all the information needed for a decision is there. And then the TC at the plenary will be well equipped to take a decision. But again, my recommendation to reach out all the members would be to do it via CIB, just like you have to do it for new work items. The new work item form is mandatory. So you can download the new work item form on the CEN BOSS website. Normally, who fills the new work item forms are the working group conveners, of course, with the support of the experts, or eventually the working group secretary, if there is one. There are many fields that need to be completed. So you need to indicate if it's a new standard or if it's a revision of a standard. If it's a revision of the standard, you need to indicate which standards will, or which standard will supersede. You need to indicate the scope, the justification, stakeholders impacted, if it's linked with legislation, if it's linked with a standardization request. In case of parallel work, you need to indicate there that, okay, you plan to work together with ISO, and you need to indicate whose lead is going to be. So this is also a very important tool for us to understand if the work, for example, is in parallel. If there is some information missing at the end of the process, do not forget to contact the CCMC, normally project manager, who can help you with that. Once the new work item ballot closes and it's approved, basically the TC secretary has the role to go to the project's online working area and basically complete with the same information what was in the new work item form over there. And then it means that I think normally 1 day later, the new work item information will all be available on projects online. If the work item is accepted, this means that standstill applies. So at national level, you cannot do anything that will be, or initiate any work that will conflict with the scope of the project that is under development. So this is quite important. So here we decided to add This is more applicable to TC secretaries. Sometimes there are questions on what they are supposed to do in projects online working area, what CCMC is supposed to do. Some decisions are fully automatic. So this means that once you take a decision in a TC, the TC secretary, if the process is fully automatic, just needs to go to projects online working area and submit it. And then normally 1 day later, everything should be fine. However, there are some processes that are semi-automatic. This means that TC secretaries need to do something, and then CCMC needs to follow up and do something. So I thought it would be useful to share this slide here, because there are always questions about these kind of processes. So you can consult this later. So when the working group basically is happy with the draft standard, so the working group convener will have to ensure that, okay, consensus is reached, everyone is ready to the public inquiry. Of course, the working group convener and the working group secretary or professional standardization support needs to ensure that the draft standard is in line with our internal regulations part 3. Then the working group convener or working group secretary submits the document to the TC secretary, who does as well another final check to see if the rules are, let's say, fulfilled. And if yes, the TC secretary will submit the draft standard for inquiry to CCMC via the new submission interface. And you're going to have a small session this afternoon about the new submission interface that is replacing eTrans, which was the tool that we used to have for the submission of documents to the TC to CC from the TC to CCMC. So then we are in. Once we receive the document, we have 5 weeks to do an in-check and to do the editing of the standard. The in-check, basically, we take a look at the standard and we see, for example, if the images are with the right format, if the formulas were correctly used with the right tools, if the draft template for developing standards was used. So we do this kind of check. And if everything is fine, we will allocate the standard to our editor that has together with the in-check. So all this process is 5 weeks. So afterwards, and because the standards are normally drafted in English, but the official language in CEN are English, French, and German. After this process, we will request our member in France and Germany to translate the documents into French and German. They have 8 weeks to do that. And after the 8 weeks, we will launch the public inquiry that has a duration of 12 weeks. This is an important stage where our members at national level in the mirror committees will discuss the draft document, and then they will, of course, cast a vote, and the documents will be, the comments can be provided as well. Such comments could be of editorial or technical nature. After the 12 weeks, when the inquiry basically closes, what we do is we collate all the comments that were submitted. Our tool calculates the voting results, and then we submit that information to the TC secretary, who has the responsibility also to circulate that information to the TC. So once the TC receives the comments and the results, they have to make an assessment of what to do next. So normally the TC always needs to organize a meeting to discuss the comments. Normally we call that meeting the comments resolution meeting. And the TC they allocates that task to the working group. So it's not the TC itself dealing with the comments resolution meeting. Normally they allocate that task to the working group. And then, of course, each comment needs to be considered. So they go through each comment and they will reply to the comment. It's not because that someone commented that comment needs to be integrated in the standard. That is basically a discussion that needs to be decided and taken place and decided by the respective working group. And normally, if there are comments, the final draft is revised and then at a certain point submitted to CCMC for formal vote. So this is the right path that you can see here on the slide, and this is the most common one. On the left side, It's possible under certain conditions to skip formal vote and therefore speed up the process of publication of a standard. But for doing that, there are some criteria that you need to meet. The first one is that the inquiry vote must be positive, logical, of course. The second one is that the TC will have to take a decision to skip the formal vote, and this is a simple majority decision. And very important aspect is that technical comments cannot be taken into account if you wish to skip formal vote, only editorial comments. And that's why most of the times, from my experience, from our experience, the formal vote is not skipped because there are always technical comments that were submitted for a reason to improve the draft standard. So that's why most of the times we follow the right path over here. Yes. So there is the obligation that the TC needs to review the comments. Normally, this is done with a comment resolution meeting. Well, if it's just 3 comments, if the working group discusses somehow, I mean, the TC will have to go back, the TC leadership will have to go back to the working group convener. If there are 3 comments, the working group convener perhaps can manage that by correspondence with a working group, but the working group needs to be involved. And then maybe for such case, there is no need to have a meeting. If it's really limited or if there are no comments, then the advice maybe would be not to have the meeting. Welcome. So now we enter into the stage of formal vote. So it's very similar to what happened before for inquiry in terms of standardization procedures. This means that the document is submitted to CCMC for formal vote. We have 5 weeks to do the in-check and editing, just like what I explained earlier for inquiry. And after that, after we finalize the editing, we submit the document to our French and German member to translate the document. And they have 5 weeks to translate the document into French and German. And after that, we launch the formal vote. The formal vote has a duration of 8 weeks. And similarly to the inquiry, it's the stage where the members will discuss at national level the final draft and then cast the vote. They can still provide comments. But of course, the golden rule in standardization is that after formal vote, technical comments cannot be taken into account. Only editorial comments are possible. Of course, both the inquiry and the formal votes are approved via a weighted vote. So this means 55% of the votes in favor. Yes. 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 Well, I would say, yeah, so the question was about the difference between the roles of, let's say, members of a TC and the observers, full members and observers. So the difference for me is really on voting rights, because the experts in the working group, regardless where they come from, if they are appointed by a member or if they are appointed by EU partners, they have the same rights in contributing to the drafting of the standards. So here, in my point of view, in the working group level is exactly the same. At the TC level, the difference is, of course, that the members can vote if there is a need, and the observers are therefore contributing to the discussions, to follow the discussions, but they cannot vote. Welcome. So the weighted votes, as I was saying, consists of 55% of votes in favor plus 65% of the population. And this applies to both inquiry and formal vote. And if these criteria are met, this means that the standard can be approved. And if you are also interested in knowing the weighted votes of the different CEN members, basically you just have to go to the internal regulations part 2, in particular the annex D2, where you can see per member what is the weight allocated. And the weight is following, basically these weights are following the Lisbon Treaty, which means that is a calculation of the GDP with the population of the country. Yeah.
If one of the countries abstain, so is the 65% of the total or only of the members that have voted.
So the question is if some members abstain, if the result is of the total, or if only the members that voted, and the answer would be only the 65% is only of the members who voted. So if there are only 3 members who voted, we will calculate the 65% of those 3 members that voted. So, as I said, technical comments cannot be taken into account after the formal votes, and that's why the technical board took a decision, an important decision in 2019 on how to deal with technical comments. And basically, the BT decision says that after formal vote, only obvious editorial errors can be taken into account. And there is a definition of what is an obvious editorial error, which is an error that is immediately understood and recognized by both the CCMC editor and the TC secretary. If one of these actors think that the error is technical, then it means that it cannot be included. And we had some long dialogues in the past on whether a mistake was technical or editorial. This is sometimes a little bit controversial. But I think after this BT decision, the situation really improved a lot. We can understand that from the TC point of view and the working group point of view, changing a minus with a plus accidentally in a formula, it's a mistake that was done accidentally. From our point of view, it has a technical impact. Remember, the standard was voted by all our members. If we change something afterwards, we are changing something that was voted by our members. So we need to be extremely careful with that. And that's why we normally reject these kind of comments. However, there are some possibilities that you have in case, let's imagine after the formal vote, there was technical comments provided and the working group admits that, okay, this is really important, we overlooked something, we need to include these technical changes, otherwise the standard will not be good enough or with the quality that they would like. In this case, the BT is there to help you. So there are different possibilities. One possibility would be that, okay, you only have limited changes that you need in the standard. And if you don't do it, the standard will be incorrect, or you would apply the standard wrongly. So in this case, there is a procedure in place. It's called the BT decision 48/2014 for limited technical changes after the formal vote. It's a little bit bureaucratic because the TC needs to agree, then the BT member holding the secretariat of the TC needs to make a request for the CEN BT chair and the CEN standardization director. Then we need to go to the BT, which is a 1-month ballot, a weighted vote. So it's a long process, but it really can help you to improve the standard without the need to come back in time and launch another vote. Another possibility is what I just said. You could, if there are many changes, many technical changes needed, you could request the technical board for a second formal vote. And another possibility, obviously, would be that you just, agree to publish the standard, and then after the publication of the standard, you initiate an amendment or a revision of the standard. So the CCMC editing time is what happens after the formal votes. We will edit the standard. We have 2 weeks to do that. After we edit and we take into account the editorial remarks, we will contact the technical committee and we will ask them, do you agree that we publish this standard? We call this stage the TC proofing. The TC has 2 weeks to validate the document. If they wish, they could have an additional week. So the max time for TC proofing would be 3 weeks. But of course, on holiday, summer period, Christmas period, if there is a need, we could also be a little bit more flexible and give a little bit more time. Yes. So the question is about the TC proofing, if it's done by correspondence of there is a meeting. So this is, for me, really up to the working group to decide what would be the best way to deal with the final document to be validated. If it could be controversial, if there are many comments and if there are technical comments and you want to discuss what is the best way forward, maybe a meeting could be needed. So otherwise, you can also do the work by correspondence. But this is completely under the responsibility of the working group to decide what would be the best way for the TC proofing. Okay, so We move to the publication. So as I said, once the document is done, CCMC makes the document available to all CEN members for national implementation. So this means that one standard published at EU level will be exactly the same in 34 countries. This is really the power of an European standard. There are also some obligations for our members, because one standard published at EU level means that our members not only need to publish at national level that standard, but also withdraw all the national conflicting standards with that European standard. I also said that standards are developed in English, French, and German, and then the other members can decide to translate the standard in their own language, other than English, French, and German, if they wish. So this is completely of the choice of our member. So in terms of maintenance, we have amendments, we have corrigenda, we have revisions. So in case the standard is published, one possibility to make corrections would be to produce an amendment. An amendment is quite useful if you don't want to discuss the whole document and you just want to discuss specific, let's say, parts of the document. There is an important golden rule for amendments, which is you cannot produce an amendment of a standard that is older than 4 years. If it's older than 4 years, forget about amendments. You are forced, if you want to change something small or something big, we are always forced to go with a revision. And if you decide to go with an amendment, you need to follow the normal process. So you need to launch, the TC secretary needs to launch a CIB for approving the new work item. And if it's approved, there will be the normal track of inquiry and formal vote. Corrigenda are a bit tricky, very tricky actually, and should be avoided as much as possible. If you can, please avoid corrigendas for one main reason. No one votes on corrigendas. The standard is published, there is a request from the TC, then we need to make an assessment if it qualifies as a corrigenda request, yes or no, and then CCMC would make the changes and the document is published. There is no voting. Corrigendas should be used really to correct mistakes that can lead to the incorrect or unsafe use of standards. I would say that really the requirement should be something that could lead to unsafe application of the standard. I remember when I was the PM of a TC, firefighting systems, and there was a mistake in a standard about the distance between the sprinkler in the ceiling and the column. The sprinkler is an important tool for the safety of people that use buildings. So I thought, okay, I think it qualifies because it could put in risk the life of the users of the building. So this is the kind of cases where a corrigenda should be used. Then obviously we have, yes, sorry, there is a question. Well, normally 2, I think more than 2 is difficult. Sorry, so the question was how many amendments a standard can have. So in theory, should be max 2, as long as you do it within the 4 years, because that's the important rule that you need to keep, that an amendment is only possible for a standard that is max 4 years. Then under some special procedures via BT, there could be more than 1 amendment, but I would say that overall it should be 2 amendments. Yeah. So in terms of revision, each standard after 5 years, that is after publication, needs to go through a systematic review. So we launch, our IT tool launches the systematic review of that particular standard. Each systematic review is launched every quarter. And in the systematic review, there are, I think, 3 questions. Whether the standards should be revised, confirmed, or withdrawn. So after the 5 months of systematic review, the TC will have to take those results, go back to the TC and discuss and follow up those results. So the systematic review consultation is not a decision as such. There is the need always to follow up the systematic review results with a decision. I've seen cases where the systematic review decided to revise the standard, and then in the plenary meeting, after a discussion, there was the conclusion rather to take a decision to confirm the standard. So this is possible. Of course, if the outcome of the systematic review is to revise the standard, so you don't take a decision to revise as such. What you do is, again, you launch a CIB for approving a new work item to start revising a standard. And if it's approved, you follow the normal process of inquiry and formal vote. Yes, that is a question.
Standard has been amended. Is it automatically that it has to be revised, or can the amendment and standard then exist for further 5 years?
So the question is about in case an amendment, if a standard includes an amendment, how the systematic review works, if then it resets the timing and starts counting the 5 years from the moment that the amendment is published, or if the reference timing would be the publication of the standard. And the answer would be the timing of the publication of the standard is what determines if your systematic review. So even if you have a standard published today and in 3 years' time you have an amendment published, 2 years later you're going to have, or 1 year later, you're going to have the systematic review happening. So it's
not that then you have to revise the standard course to include the amendment.
No, the systematic review is launched, and hopefully, if everyone is happy with the standard, the answer should be to confirm, and then the TC will have to follow up that with a TC decision to confirm the standards. Yes, there is another question. Sprinklers, yeah. Were you in the TC? Okay. So the question is about my story. Apparently, I didn't make the conclusion. I'm sorry for that. It was about the sprinkler and how it concluded if the corrigenda was accepted or not. So that was accepted because it was a typical good example of how corrigendas should be used, because there was really the safety of people in the building that could be jeopardized if the standard would be applied with these wrong distances between the column and the sprinkler. So this is a very good example where we could accept a corrigenda and it was accepted. No, there is no, I mean, normally there is no limitation. There is a corrigenda that can be issued whenever. But 10 years, I would say that is really too much. I think 10 years, it means that probably the standard was confirmed after confirmed, and maybe in that case, if it's very urgent, we could correct it. But I think it would be necessary to revise the standard to then take into account those matters. Welcome. So the flexible standard development process is something that entered into force in 2019. So we have changed the way we worked in terms of developing standards. It's a tool that is really helpful to technical committees to manage better the project, because the technical committee, they are the project owners. So it's a tool to help you to decide how much time you need to drafting the standard and to handle the comments, and how much time you need to handle the comments after the inquiry closes. It's applicable to CEN homegrown standards and CEN work items under VN agreements and with CEN lead. So this means that it's not applicable to EN ISO standards with ISO lead. So for those cases, we follow the ISO process. If you are interested in learning more, and it's quite important that you understand this new system, that you follow these webinars and presentations, and the process is also on the slide. Before the flexible standard development process, the system was quite rigid or static, in the sense that the TC would have 68 weeks to develop the standards in total, split equally between stage A, which is the stage to draft standards, and stage E, which is the stage after the closure of the inquiry to handle the comments. So it was equally divided this time, and there was no opportunity to have a little bit more time at the beginning or afterwards. With a flexible approach, the idea is that the TCs will still have 68 weeks to draft the standards, but you as a TC, you can decide how much time you want for stage A to draft the standard and stage E to handle the comments after the inquiry. There are basically two important rules. You cannot allocate as much time as you want. For stage A, the minimum time is 1 week, and the stage E, the minimum time would be 6 weeks. So in theory, you could have stage A 1 week, because you have worked on the standard under the preliminary work item stage, for example, and then The work item is approved. You have 1 week basically to deal with the submission of the document to CCMC, and then you would have 67 weeks after the closure of the inquiry, if you wish. So it's really to give you the possibility and the flexibility to choose how much time you need for the different stages. And as I said, 68 weeks in total compared to, which is exactly the same as the previous system. What is very important is that you indicate how much time you need for the drafting process and what would be the target date to submit the document to inquiry. And you need as well to indicate what will be the time you need to submit the document to CCMC for formal vote. So these dates, you need to discuss them with the working group, and they need to be included in the new work item form. The target date to dispatch the first working draft is basically half of the time that you would have for dispatching the document to CCMC for inquiry. So here you have the new work item form extraction. If you look at field 19, you can see exactly the fields where you need to indicate the target date to dispatch the document to inquiry and to formal vote. Here is what the TC secretary, so this part is mainly for TC secretaries, is what you will see on projects online working area. So when you are registering the new work item in the projects online working area, please remember that there are 2 fields that are editable, which are the fields to submit the document to inquiry and to submit the document to formal vote. So this needs to be completed by the TC secretariat, in line, of course, with the new work item forms. Now, one good practice for TC secretaries would be that before starting the new work item ballot, the new work item, the TC secretary would take the information from the work item form, submitted already before the ballot of the CI of the new work item is launched, submitted in projects online working area, but you don't submit, you save. And then you can see very clearly the time that will be allocated for the drafting stage and for handling the comments after the inquiry. And then when you launch the ballot, you attach that PDF with the new work item form. So this is mandatory according to the BT decision. There is a recent BT decision that says that every time you launch a CIB to approve a new work item, you need to attach the new work item form. And this would be an easy way, because once the new work item ballot closes, you can, if everything is fine, you can just submit and go to the next, and it's approved, and 1 day later, it can save you some time at the end of the process, basically. What is important is also that if you are somehow at the end if you're getting close to the inquiry dispatch date, and you as a TC realize that you need more time, that you didn't plan well because there were some, or you planned well, but there were some difficult discussions in the working group and you need more time, there is always the possibility before the dispatch of the document to the inquiry to use this one change option. So basically you can change the deadline to submit the document to the inquiry, but we will not change the date to dispatch the document to formal vote. You don't gain more time. Basically what you do is that you steal time from that you allocated in front after the inquiry backwards. The recommendation would always for you to use the one change option, and only if you really feel that the one change option will not help you because 1 month, 2 months is not enough, you can apply then as a second choice that you can take a decision for a tolerance of 9 months. So remember that the one change option, there is no need for a TC decision, it's just an agreement within the TC, while for the tolerance, there is the need to have a TC decision. Yeah. Well, normally, according to the rules, the TC can request only one tolerance of 9 months. Now, on some exceptional cases where a second tolerance, otherwise we would have like a standard developed not in 3 years, but in 6, 7 years, would be way too much if we keep asking tolerance. But normally, the TC can decide of a tolerance of 9 months. If there is a need for a second tolerance, this should be considered exceptional, and the TC would need to make a request, a justified request to the technical board why a second tolerance is needed. Okay. And a third tolerance, I think I never saw it in my life. Yes.
Just one question. If we work under a preliminary item,
yeah.
Can we then reduce the work item time? because we have already done some work before.
Yeah, so the question is about if a TC works under a preliminary work item, if then a TC could choose during the development of the standard when the new work item is active to reduce the time. Absolutely. So you have 68 weeks. If you did most of your job under the preliminary work item stage, you could allocate just 10 weeks for drafting the standard and 10 weeks after the inquiry, or 5 weeks, you could do that. And then if you see that actually there were some problems, then you can apply the one change option and add the time that you didn't allocate because you thought it was not needed until, of course, the fulfillment of the 68 weeks. So that's the rule in place. Okay. So the goal of this presentation was to focus on standards development. We have other deliverables like technical specification, technical reports, CEN workshop agreements. In terms of technical specifications, I like to call it a pre-standard. Is basically when the TC feels that the requirements or the methods or the tests are not robust enough to be included in a standard, they might go with the technical specification, or when the TC feels that there is no consensus to go with the European standard, a technical specification could be used. Normally, once the new work item is created, a TC would have 12 months to deliver the technical specification to CCMC for the vote. There is only one vote, so that's one of the differences between a technical specification and a standard, where a standard has 2 votes, the inquiry and the formal vote. The technical specification only has 1 vote. That's also the reason why it's much shorter or is much faster to develop a technical specification than an European standard. And again, with the technical specification, please remember that there is no obligation for our members to withdraw national conflicting standards. That's another difference. Technical reports are informative documents containing informative material. So inside the technical report, you cannot have requirements. We know that in the past, we could still see some technical reports with requirements. Actually, this rule is now included in IR3, so you cannot have shalls, for example, in a technical report. It could be to include, for example, data from services or some statistical data. In terms of development, is very close to a technical specification in the sense that once the new work item is created, there are 12 months then to submit a standard to CCMC for a vote. And the publication of or the approval of a technical report is done via simple majority, while for a standard and the TS, you have the weighted vote applying. And of course, the development of a TR is really shorter than a European standard and also a TS. Then we have the workshop agreements. The workshop agreements is the 4th type of deliverable that we have. It should be used really for whenever there is a new technology in place, or let's say there is a new Horizon project, Horizon 2020 project, where the outcome is the development of a standardization deliverable. So the workshop agreements are quite flexible. So it's open to non-European companies as well. And our members do not need to appoint members or experts to attend the workshop agreement. That is direct participation, basically. And any company or organization can join at any stage, really also at the end of the process, if needed. The workshop agreement, basically, there is no vote on it. So the chair needs to see if consensus has been reached, and if yes, consensus by the participants. This means that the CWA then can be published. The inquiry is not mandatory, but is recommended as well to launch an inquiry for a CWA. In terms of lifespan, a CWA has a duration of 3 weeks that then can be extended to 3 years that can be extended to 3 additional years, so a max lifetime of 6 years. And this means that afterwards there is an important decision to make on whether a TC would take over the work and try to develop another deliverable following the work done in the CWA, or it could be withdrawn by the technical board if no one wants to continue the work. So that was my part. Now Thierry will continue. Yes, there was a question.
For technical report and technical specification. After the vote, do we have to take into account the topic how it can go?
So the question is about votes on technical reports and technical specifications, and in case there are comments after the votes, how to deal with those comments, basically. So basically, yeah, the problem is that there is only one vote. This means that technical comments cannot be taken into account. We know that, we know that sometimes this can be problematic for our TCs because they didn't foresee certain things, they forgot, or they didn't consider certain aspects that then the members at national level provided a comment. So in my case, in my experience, normally either the document is published or the TC could exceptionally request, if the comments are really relevant, those technical comments are really relevant, the TC could all request the BT for a second vote on a TS or a TR. So that possibility is there in case of need, but should be considered exceptional.
Okay, so first of all, I will apologize for my voice. I got a little seasonal cold this weekend, so I can have some trouble sometime. So we will speak here about more specific relational case, and the first case is the relation that we have with ISO. In the field of CEN ISO, there is an agreement which is called the Vienna Agreement. And what is the Vienna Agreement? It is a formal agreement between ISO and CEN. It was initiated, as you may have seen, back in 1991, revised in 2001, and there are some guidelines for implementation. The basic is that we are trying to avoid duplication of work between international and European level. And of course, similar to European standard, ISO is trying to promote global economy. You may see from this little diagram that there is about 32% of ENs identical to ISO documents. This onion, I will describe quite rapidly, show all the layers of the Vienna Agreement. The smaller circle is, of course, the most important, the most affecting your work is a parallel development of common deliverable. So it is really the work where ISO and CEN work on the same document, and they do it in parallel. The second layer is more an adoption of an available publication. So it means that at the end of the ISO publication, CEN will take over an existing published ISO standard. There is then, let's say, lighter relations with ISO. It is the representation in meetings. So basically, it is a liaison where a representative from an ISO committee could participate in a CEN committee. There can be also cooperation by correspondence, so it is more an exchange of information between two TCs. And of course, there are some exchange at higher level, which are strategic exchange to manage the functioning of the Vienna Agreement. So the basic principle of the Vienna Agreement, so the smaller circle in the previous slide, is the development in parallel of a document based on an ISO or a CEN document. And in order to do this, each of the technical committee in ISO and CEN will have to create a work item and to develop the work item in parallel. The system is similar to what Nuno explained for the classical homegrown standard. There will be also translation and same type of inquiry, but this will be done in parallel. What may be different, of course, is that at the end of the process, if there is a disagreement between the global view and the European view, then there is basically two options. one of the options is the revision of the CEN ISO standard, or it can be a development of a CEN document based on the ISO standard, the ISO initial standard. So what happens when you develop, for example, an European standard, and later you are wishing to develop an ISO standard? This is possible as well. As you can see on this example, EN 15157 was an European standard, and at a certain stage, the European Committee decided to offer it to ISO in order to have a global impact. So we did exactly the same process. We vote on the standard, we possibly slightly improve it, and at the end of the day, of course, we could not keep the EN reference. We got a new ISO identification, and so we published the document as EN ISO 17142 in this case. So basically, the process, when, as I mentioned already, when there is an agreement between two technical committees, we will have to create work items, but we need also to define which will be the lead in the process. Usually, it is ISO which is leading the process. As mentioned already, new work item to be created in both CEN and ISO standard and ISO committee, and then the two central secretariat in Geneva and here will synchronize for the launching of the inquiry and also for the launching of the final list. There is a possibility, of course, like for European standard, to skip the formal vote if there are very little comments, and that those comments are not technical and do not need to be incorporated into the standard. As mentioned already, we will also synchronize the parallel voting. And of course, we'll get a parallel publication, and later we will be able to amend or revise the ISO document. This was very brief. I don't know if you have another more in detail session, but now I will work with, continue to explain you the relation with another important actor for CEN and CENELEC. It is the relation with the legislator, the European legislator, and mainly the way to collaborate with the European Commission is through the publication of harmonized standards. And of course, there are possibilities to have sometimes, it happens in some legislation that the European Commission decides on their own to refer some standard into their legislation, but is heavily discouraged by the legislator, because remember the standard need to remain voluntary. And in order to do that, was invented many years ago, over 20 years ago, what we call the New Approach Directive. What is a New Approach Directive? It is a directive which in fact defines a set of essential requirements related to health and safety and indicate what shall be achieved without specifying how. And of course, this legislation is transposed by the member states in the national legislation. And then we will develop standards based on a Commission request, and we will develop specific type of standard, which is called harmonized standard, and I will explain what are the difference between the classical standard. So, in fact, CEN and CENELEC have then the possibility to define technical specification to meet the essential requirements of the New Approach Directive. There's another way to explain it through a diagram. You have the European Commission, Council, and Parliament, which design the goal, the directive, the regulation, and a set of requirements, and then CEN and HC will define standard to explain how to meet those requirements set in the legislation. And so the standard remain voluntary, and I will explain later how it will be linked to the European legislation. And of course, like usual, the standard will be revised every 5 years. Now, what is the way for the Commission to ask us to develop harmonized standards to support a directive? This is done through what we call a standardization request, also sometimes called, as it was a terminology in the past, a mandate. In order to do this, there is, of course, a directive or a legislation, and then the second box on the top, the Commission announced that, and this is done on a yearly basis, announce what will be the coming standardization request in a work program, in your work program. So it gives you a kind of menu. And then the EC desk officer will contact CCMC, and of course, CCMC will contact the relevant technical committee, because then the Commission will come with a kind of act, which is called the standardization request. Standardization request is a kind of contract between the Commission and the European Standardization Organization. And when this standardization request will be accepted, there is a binding commitment on the timing and the work program given by the ESOs. So it is very important that when a standardization request is appearing in your sector, that you explain and you check exactly what will be in the menu of the standardization request, and usually the standardization request contain annex, which list a series of standards with a time frame. And this is, of course, very important to be sure that you are able to meet this time frame. This will lead, of course, later when the standardization request, and I'm now on the bottom right of the slide, this will lead to a series of harmonized European standards, which, as you know, I remind you, are voluntary. They could be developed in parallel with ISO and IEC. And when they are okay to be supporting a directive, they will be cited in OJ. It means that they are not referred in the legislation. They are simply on a regular basis cited on a list related to the relevant directive. Then, of course, those standards get the presumption of conformity with the essential requirements, could get the possibility to oppose CE marking, and therefore it's more easy for the industry to match the content of European standard rather than to develop their own agreement with the certification body. And of course, after that, there is a cycle, a regular cycle of the revision of the standard. There can be also revision of the legislation and new standardization request. It's never finished. So, yes.
Is there a foundation if there's some R&D work to do, or if there for validation of the standard? So sometimes development of standard costs a lot of money. So can you get some money from the European Commission, develop standards, or how does it work?
The question is, can you get funding from the European Commission in order to develop a standard in the field of standardization request? Normally, it is decoupled. You cannot say, oh, I will accept the standardization request if you give me funding, Mr. Commission. But of course, it is a little blurred. Sometimes if you see that you will not get funding, you need to say, well, okay, then in this case, it will take much more time because I will need to find the funding somewhere else. I will need to get maybe a research and development program. And obviously, I will not be able to produce a standard so quick. So formally, yes, you cannot say, I accept the standardization request if you provide me funding, but you can, through CCMC, of course, we can try to see if we could get some funding to support this. And usually, of course, the Commission will fund programs which are new, which are close to, let's say, the politics. For example, if you develop, I don't know, hydrogen or railways, those are very modern topic, which of course the Commission is prepared to fund. Yes.
You said there's no need for certification. That means that you still need a conformity assessment linked to the standard.
When I was mentioning here that by the fact that there is an harmonized standard referred in the list of the European Commission, I'm speaking in general for most of the directive, it means that if you apply the standard, the constraint on the industry is lighter. If you do not use an harmonized standard, you will need to prepare a portfolio defining all the spec that you are using. So it will be much more costly in terms of certification. Okay. So here it's just a couple of, okay.
One question for since years the number of harmonized standards is decreasing every year. My PC, the companies said we are not going to do harmonized standards anymore because it took too much time. We are going to use ISO standards. At the end, we have to do a risk analysis anyway. So this whole system harmonization is decreasing since 5 years. Is there a plan B from STEM and CEN to resolve this problem? Because ISO said we can do anything. We only have our standards, it's a European thing. But this harmonization system with the HAS consultants, it's not the first time that they are not working and the Commission ran out of money. The second time since the whole system is working. Is there any plan B how to?
I'm sorry to interrupt you because your question is very long and I will need to summarize it. I will cover this in a few minutes. So if you can bear with me, I will tackle this aspect. But there is no plan B. If you want to have a standard supporting a legislation, you need to get an European standard. Even if you base your standard on an ISO document. So no, there is no real plan B. But I will come back and maybe later we can try to regroup the question at the end of the session because I guess there is some time pressure as well. So I will not read the detail of this slide. This is giving you simply a set of the key directives which are well-known and new approach. This is kind of summary of what is the key elements of a standard supporting new approach. There is a need to get a standardization request. There is a need, and there is your big question about the Ernst & Young, etc. We will come back on that. The assessment in order to get the compliance with the essential requirements of the directive, the content of the Annex ZA, the need to cite the standard in the OJE, and of course, this list of standards are published in the OJE, and it replies already to the question that you raised. The only way to get a standard giving presumption of conformity is to fulfill the requirements which are listed on this slide. So coming back to the standardization request, usually there is always it's a template. Here, what I show you is a template of the standardization request. There will always be an Article 1 which will refer to the legislation. There is an Article 2 which will explain what is the work program and the time frame, and usually it is detailed in an annex. And then there is an Article 3, which is the need to provide a work program, because when you get the standardization request 6 months or 3 months after, you need to reconfirm the work program. And then, of course, there is a kind of scrutiny. And so on an annual basis, CEN and CENELEC need to give a report back to the Commission. So there is also, so as I said, a list of the standard request by the standardization request and a validity of the standardization request. One of the key elements in order to have an harmonized standard is to get the matching, as I said before, between the essential requirements and the clause of the standard. And it is an example. There are several types of templates. This is an example of machinery directive because it's a big sector. That's why I choose this to take this as a model. It's always more or less the same structure. There is always a kind of title, as you can see on the screen. There is on the first column a list of the essential requirements relevant to be matched by clause, and in the second column there is a table, a list of clause matching the essential requirements. The last column is used very rarely and after recommendation of a HRS consultant or the Commission. What will happen also, because it has changed recently, a couple of years ago, when the standard is published, we will offer the standard to the European Commission. Normally, we offer the standards which have obtained a compliance assessment from the Ernst & Young consultant, and therefore the Commission would be able to cite it. It can happen that, nevertheless, the Commission is not happy with the conclusion of the consultant and come back to us for improvement. But this is not the purpose of this slide. The purpose of this slide is to explain you that when the Commission accepts the standard to be referred, they will issue a new act. And the standardization request is an administrative act. The publication in the OJE is also an administrative act of the Commission, and it is approved by the College of Commissioners. And what will be this act? This act will contain a list of the approved by the Commission standard to be referred in the OJE, and also it may happen, of course, that we withdraw, that the Commission withdraw older standards. But of course, it will not be the full list. In the past, we had each time we had in the C communication official journal of the European Commission, we had a full list. Nowadays, it's only a set of the newly appointed approved standard for reference in the OJE. But there is always regularly updated a summary giving the full list of the standard currently supporting a type of directive. So I will not enter because you are quite late on the process. So basically, there is a request for standard coming from the Commission. It is addressed to CEN. We approve it, and when we approve it, we need to develop a series of standards. And in order to achieve proper list of harmonized standards, we need to have those referred in the OJE. No, we come to the HRS assessment. This has been performed in the past, the assessment were performed by consultant managed by CEN, but the Commission decided to have a more neutral system. And already in 2018, the Commission opened a call for a service provider, and at that time it was already Ernst & Young who got the contract. But after that, when the contract of 2018 was finished, early 2022, the Commission had, of course, to launch a new call. They took a little bit of time to launch this call, but finally we got the call. we got the approval of the call, we got the selection, it is again Ernst & Young. And since August, the new contract has been signed, but as some colleagues in the room have said, there has been a big time during which there were no service provider. And so we got a backlog of around 296 standards to be assessed. And now, since mid-October, when the system was relaunched, there has been so far 51 reports received. So there is still a backlog, and of course, new standard coming, because since October, we are developing, we are submitting new requests. So we can say that the HRS assessment is restored and improved. There is a bigger budget. There is also a bigger budget for communication. More communication is allowed between the Ernst & Young consultant and you, and the technical committee secretary and working group. The budget in general has been increased to get more man-days. And there is also a new concept that I will detail later of new last conformity assessment step. There is an introduction of the conditional compliance, and this I will detail also later. What I wish to mention is that there is a new portal made by, designed by Ernst & Young, allowing you to ask for a meeting, to organize a meeting when you get a non-compliant assessment and you want to understand if you did it well by addressing the comment of the consultant. We will, you have the possibility to ask for a meeting. There is a portal, but I have to say that you need to be careful with this portal because it's not very user-friendly, and you need to encode the data in a way that the machine understands it. So you need, for example, if you need a meeting of 1 hour, you just put 1 and not 1 hour. Hour is will create a problem. So we will come back on that because there are some, it's not very easy, and we can get blocked to submit a request. I got already some experience of TC secretary having problem, but we will try to clarify this in the coming weeks. The assessments are, as usual, provided 5 weeks after the notification to Ernst & Young, but of course, for the moment, as there is a backlog, it will take a little bit more time. Just a reminder, but because this was already the case in the past, the HRS consultants are there to perform assessment tasks. It means checking that the clause of the standard are really addressing the essential requirements of the standard. They can, of course, participate in meetings to clarify their assessment, and they can explain EC position to technical committees. They are not there to contribute to standard developments, to offer guidance to TCs, to perform assessment on non-official documents submitted through the normal channel, or they are not allowed to modify their assessment report or participate in meeting without Ernst & Young, because otherwise they will not be paid to do this. So I mentioned that there is a new step where you can get an assessment. It is at the last conformity assessment moment. I will come back on the next slide on that. So in the past, there were 2 assessments, one at indicative stage. It means when the document was mature enough, doesn't mean not yet ready for inquiry, but sufficiently mature enough, it was possible to get, and it's still possible now, to get an assessment, a first assessment, which will allow you to get a first idea of what are the lacks in the standard. And I can only but encourage you to do this, because it is very helpful for the TC at later stage. There is then a second assessment which takes place at the moment of the inquiry, and even if we receive the result before the launching of the inquiry, we will launch the inquiry, and this will be studied after the inquiry. And of course, there is an assessment before formal vote. Nowadays, there is still this 3 assessment possible, but if you succeed, if you have a non-compliant assessment before formal vote, you need to understand that you need to resolve it, because otherwise you will get blocked and the standard will not be referred in DOJ. So there is an additional step. When you get a non-compliant assessment at before formal vote, you will have the possibility to resolve the problem, and then to meet with a consultant. And when it is resolved, you will have the possibility to get a new last conformity assessment. It's always better to try to have this before the formal vote. There is, of course, another possibility is that you ask the last conformity assessment after the formal vote. But then, of course, if you get a surprise, you will need to have some corrective actions through amendment or something like that. So from my perspective, it's not so interesting to do this, but there can be cases where it is necessary to follow this path. So there are 3 types of reply to an assessment. Either the assessment is compliant, so good news. There are sometimes conditional compliance. It is a case where there are problems with normative reference, because yes, there has been a lot of seminar, and I can only but invite you to follow one of those webinars on dating of normative reference. If the normative reference are not properly dated, you will get a non-compliant assessment, but usually it's simply applying the rules. So it's not so difficult, and if we get a conditional compliance, it can be resolved without having to go to another loop. If there is a lack of compliance, this means that there can be some problem with normative reference, but usually there will be other problems with Annex Z, or maybe some content in the standard. So yes, you have been following this webinar, but there is another one which took place early last week, and which is dedicated to HRS assessment system. I would invite you to try to follow. There has been a recording available. Please, if you want more information, more detailed information, listen to this webinar and come back to your program manager or account manager if you have further questions. The system, we have a system of exchanging documents with Ernst & Young, and the system, as you know, the LifeLink system was used in the past. This will now be closed for every technical committee. There is now a new platform, and basically also for the exchange between CCMC and the Ernst & Young services, there is a new platform, and there is also a webinar explaining how it functions. So I will stop there with this session, and if you allow me, I will go through the rest of the presentation, and then you can address all your questions, and we will use the remaining time available to address the remaining questions. Good, Jérôme, could I finish this very informative, and then I will take your question. It's very short. This part is very short. So here, basically, it's where to find information. And I hope you know that there is an excellent tool which is called the BOSS, and which gives you reference to everything. The first thing that you need to do when you have a question is to search on the boss before asking the question to the PM. And if, of course, you don't understand or you don't find in the boss, please go to the PM. But you have everything. Here I'm giving a few snapshots of the boss. You have a list here of the forms and template. There is even a little calculator to know what is the percentage if this and this country vote against the standard, etc. There are a lot of information like the template for various type of delegated decisions. And then I have a last chapter on useful information. The BT Secretariat issue regularly after big BT session a newsletter when you have a digest of the key decision taken by both BTs. So I invite you to read this. And here is simply a page where you have the key let's say, a website of CEN where you can find more information. You know that recently the website has been restructured and there is a dedicated area for CEN expert where you can find many information of a technical nature. Here, there are the list of the service, the key service where you can interact. You can, of course, interact with the PM, but when it is an issue of data nature, it's better to go to data service. When it is an issue related to production, blockage of a document, quality of a figure, go to production. If you have you need to manage a contract with an European organization, your contact persons will be the partners. And if you have issues related to research, go to research@censelect.eu. So, Jérôme, you are the first. You can ask